The cold, damp air of the shelter clung to every surface, carrying the faint echoes of barking dogs and rattling chains. In the far corner of a dimly lit kennel, a German shepherd lay curled tightly into himself. His eyes, once keen and full of life, were now dull and wary, always watching but never meeting anyone's gaze for long. His name, according to the tag on his kennel, was Rocco. Rocco had been here for months. Every time potential adopters passed by his cage, he felt their stares but never their understanding. People wanted dogs that wagged their tails eagerly, dogs that looked happy and approachable. But Rocco wasn't like that anymore. Not since the night that changed his life, since that cruel betrayal by the humans he once trusted. He had been abandoned, and although his scars were invisible to the eye, they lived deep within his heart. He watched as a group of teenagers came into the shelter that afternoon. One of them caught his attention, though Rocco wasn't sure why. The boy was thin, with dark hair that fell into his eyes. His shoulders were hunched like he was carrying an invisible weight. Rocco recognized that posture. It was one he knew too well. The boy looked scared, unsure, as if he didn't want to be there. But something about him was different from the others who had come before. This boy was Josh. Josh had never been comfortable around big dogs. They were intimidating, especially a breed like a German shepherd. But today was different. He wasn't here because he wanted a pet. He was here because his therapist had suggested volunteering at the shelter to help him build confidence. Josh had been bullied for years at school, and the emotional wounds had left him isolated and anxious. His only friend had moved away, and school had become a place he dreaded. The shelter's manager, a kind woman named Linda, led the group past the rows of barking dogs. Josh felt overwhelmed by the noise and energy, but he forced himself to stay. Then he noticed a dog that wasn't barking. "Rocco, see that one?" Linda said softly, stopping beside Rocco's kennel. "He's a special case. Been through a lot. He doesn't trust easily, but with the right person he might open up again." Josh knelt down, his eyes meeting Rocco's for the first time. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Josh felt a strange connection, like the dog understood him in a way no one else had. Both of them were wounded, both afraid to trust, but perhaps they were also searching for something neither could yet name. "Can I try to spend time with him?" Josh asked hesitantly. Linda smiled gently. "Of course, just take it slow. He'll need time to get used to you." The first few days were tough. Rocco would retreat to the back of his kennel whenever Josh approached. He refused treats and barely lifted his head. Josh began to doubt whether he could do this. The fear of rejection crept in again, the same fear he felt every day at school. But deep down, he knew that giving up wasn't an option. Not this time. He started small. He would sit outside the kennel for hours, reading aloud from his favorite book. His voice was soft and steady, filling the quiet spaces between Rocco's deep breaths. Slowly, the dog began to shift his body closer, his ears twitching at the sound of the boy's voice. One day, after nearly a week, Rocco took his first step toward Josh. It was tentative, almost hesitant, but it was progress. Josh's heart raced with hope. He held out his hand, not expecting the dog to come closer, but Rocco surprised him by sniffing his fingers. "You're not so scary," Josh whispered with a small smile. "I guess I'm not either." The days turned into weeks, and an unspoken bond grew between them. Josh learned about Rocco's quirks, the way he tilted his head at certain sounds, how he flinched when someone moved too quickly. It broke Josh's heart to see how deeply Rocco had been hurt, but it also made him more determined to help. One afternoon, Linda approached Josh with an idea. "You've done wonders for Rocco. He's made more progress with you than anyone else. Have you ever thought about adopting him?" The question caught Josh off guard. Adopting a dog? He wasn't sure if he was ready for that responsibility. His parents would need to agree, and there was still so much he didn't know about Rocco's past. But as he looked into the dog's eyes, now softer, more trusting, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe they could help each other heal. I want to try," Josh said quietly. "I'll talk to my parents." Linda nodded, her eyes full of warmth. Take your time. But I think Rocco has already chosen you. That evening, Josh talked to his parents about bringing Rocco home. They were hesitant at first, concerned about the challenges of caring for a traumatized dog. But after seeing the positive change in their son, how he stood a little taller, how his eyes lit up when he talked about Rocco, they agreed to give it a chance. The first night in his new home was hard for Rocco. He paced the house, his anxiety evident in every movement. Josh stayed close, speaking to him in a soothing voice. He set up a cozy bed in his room and waited patiently for Rocco to settle. Eventually, the dog lay down beside Josh's bed, his eyes watching the boy with a mixture of curiosity and caution. You're safe now, Josh whispered as he turned off the light. We both are. As the night deepened, Rocco closed his eyes, lulled by the quiet presence of the boy who had become his friend. For the first time in a long while, both of them felt the faint stirrings of hope. But neither of them knew that their journey was only just beginning. Challenges lay ahead, challenges that would test their bond and their courage. Yet in that moment they had each other, and that was enough. Morning light streamed through Josh's window, warming the floor where Rocco lay. The German shepherd stirred, his ears perking at the sound of movement from the bed. Josh yawned and stretched, blinking sleepily before his eyes met Rocco's. For a moment, both of them stayed still, sharing a quiet understanding. The fear that usually accompanied waking up, the fear of what the day would bring, felt less suffocating today. Good morning, Rocco, Josh said softly. He reached out a hand but didn't push too hard. Rocco, still cautious, sniffed the boy's fingers before stepping back. It was progress, and Josh smiled to himself. The next few days were a series of small victories and setbacks. Rocco explored the house with tentative steps, often retreating to the corner of Josh's room when unfamiliar sounds startled him. Loud noises, like the clatter of a dropped dish, sent him cowering, his body tense and trembling. Josh learned to move gently, always announcing his presence before approaching the dog. His parents, though initially unsure, began to see the bond forming between Josh and Rocco. His father, a quiet man who often struggled to express emotion, surprised Josh one evening by kneeling beside Rocco with a handful of treats. Hey, buddy, his dad said in a soft tone. You're a good boy, aren't you? Rocco hesitated for a moment before cautiously accepting the treat. Josh watched in awe, feeling a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Rocco could learn to trust others again. However, trust was a fragile thing. One afternoon, while Josh was walking Rocco in the neighborhood, a group of teenagers from his school appeared. These were the same kids who had tormented him for months, pushing him into lockers, mocking him, spreading rumors that left him feeling worthless. Hey, Josh, one of them sneered. Got yourself a guard dog now? What's the matter? Can't fight your own battles. Josh's heart pounded in his chest. He tightened his grip on Rocco's leash, trying to stay calm. But Rocco sensed the tension immediately. The fur along his spine bristled, and he let out a low, warning growl. The bullies laughed nervously and backed off, muttering insults under their breath. As they disappeared down the street, Josh knelt beside Rocco and gently stroked his neck. Thanks, buddy, he whispered, his voice shaking. You really are my protector, huh? Rocco's growl faded, and he leaned slightly into Josh's touch. It was the first time the dog had sought comfort from him rather than retreating into fear. That night, however, Rocco's past came back to haunt him in the form of a nightmare. His legs twitched as he whimpered softly in his sleep, his body caught in the grip of a memory he couldn't escape. Images of a man with harsh hands, loud shouting, and the pain of betrayal flooded his mind. He dreamed of being left alone in the cold, a chain digging into his neck as he barked for someone, anyone, to come back for him. Josh woke to the sound of Rocco's distressed whimpers. He sat up quickly, his heart aching at the sight of the dog trembling in his sleep. Hey, Rocco, it's okay. You're safe? Josh murmured, gently placing a hand on the dog's shoulder. Rocco jerked awake, his eyes wide and fearful. For a moment, he didn't recognize where he was. But as Josh continued to speak softly, Rocco's breathing slowed. He rested his head on the boy's lap, finding solace in the steady presence of his new friend. Over the next few weeks, Josh and Rocco grew more in sync, their bond deepening with every shared moment. But fear still lingered in both of them. Josh's fear of facing the bullies again weighed heavily on his mind, and he often found himself avoiding places where he might encounter them. Rocco, too, remained on edge around loud noises and sudden movements. Linda visited them one day to check on Rocco's progress. She watched as the dog followed Josh around the house, his body language more relaxed than it had been in the shelter. "You've done an incredible job with him," Linda said. "But I can tell he's still holding on to some fear. Trauma like that doesn't just disappear overnight. The important thing is that you're giving him a reason to trust again." Josh nodded, her words resonating deeply. He knew what it was like to carry fear and pain that didn't seem to go away. But he also knew that healing wasn't something you had to face alone. Rocco had given him a new sense of purpose, a reason to believe that things could get better. Just as things seemed to be improving, an unexpected threat loomed on the horizon. One evening, Josh overheard his parents talking in hushed tones about a break-in that had occurred in a nearby neighborhood. A group of thieves had been targeting homes, and the news left everyone on edge. Josh glanced at Rocco, who was lying at his feet. The idea of someone breaking into their home filled him with a new kind of fear, not just for himself, but for the dog who had become his protector and friend. That night, as darkness settled over the house, Josh double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Rocco seemed to sense his unease and stayed close, his eyes alert and watchful. "Don't worry," Josh whispered as he climbed into bed. "We've got each other. Nothing's going to hurt us." But deep down, both boy and dog knew that shadows from the past and present were never far away. Their greatest test was yet to come. The air was unnaturally still that night. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of trees outside and the faint creak of the house settling. Josh lay awake in bed, his mind restless. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at him since his parents mentioned the break-ins. Across the room, Rocco lay curled in his usual spot, his ears twitching at every distant noise. Suddenly, Rocco's head snapped up. His ears stood rigid, and his eyes sharpened as he listened intently. Josh sat up, his heartbeat quickening. He hadn't heard anything yet, but he trusted Rocco's instincts. The dog rose to his feet, sniffing the air, his tail stiff and tense. Then Josh heard it too, a faint noise outside, like someone moving near the side of the house. His stomach dropped. He slipped out of bed and cautiously peered through the window. In the dim light of the street lamp, he could barely make out a shadowy figure creeping along the fence line. "Dad," Josh whispered, his voice tight with fear as he hurried to his parents' room. Josh's father immediately sprang into action when he heard the news. He grabbed his phone to call the police while telling Josh to stay put. But Rocco wouldn't leave Josh's side. The dog's protective instincts had kicked into high gear, and he positioned himself between Josh and the door as if to shield him from any danger. Josh's father stepped outside to investigate while they waited anxiously in the living room. Josh hugged his knees to his chest, trying to steady his breathing. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if the intruder hurt his dad? What if they got inside? Rocco paced nervously, his eyes glued to the door. He barked once, a deep and commanding sound, as if warning any potential threat that he was ready to defend his family. Josh placed a hand on the dog's back, feeling the taut muscles beneath his fur. "We're okay, Rocco," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually his dad returned. "The police are on their way," he said, locking the door behind him. "I didn't see anyone near the house anymore, but they might still be in the area. We're going to stay inside and keep everything locked down." Josh nodded, relieved but still shaken. Rocco remained alert, his gaze never leaving the front door. The bond between them seemed stronger than ever in that moment. Two beings who had once been trapped by fear, but were now finding courage together. The police arrived shortly after and conducted a sweep of the area. They found signs that someone had been lurking near the house, but no clear evidence of an attempted break-in. Josh's parents thanked the officers, and the family tried to settle down for the night. However, sleep did not come easily for any of them. Josh lay awake long after his parents had gone to bed. Rocco remained at his side, his body still tense. "It's over now," Josh murmured, stroking the dog's fur in slow, calming motions. "You can rest." Rocco finally lay down, though his eyes stayed half open, keeping watch. Josh marveled at the dog's loyalty. Despite all the trauma Rocco had endured, he had chosen to protect and trust this family. It was a choice that deeply moved Josh. He understood now that fear could be overcome, not by running from it, but by facing it with someone who believed in you. For the first time since he had adopted Rocco, Josh felt a sense of safety he hadn't known in years. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The next day dawned clear and quiet. Rocco seemed more relaxed as he followed Josh around the house, his tail wagging slightly, a rare sign of happiness. Josh's parents praised Rocco for his alertness, and his dad even gave him a treat, patting his head affectionately. "You've got a good dog here, son," his father said. "He's part of the family now." Josh beamed with pride. He couldn't believe how much had changed in such a short time. Rocco had not only become his protector but also his partner in healing. The fear that had once defined both their lives was starting to lose its grip. Later that day, Josh decided to take Rocco to the park for a walk. The two of them needed some fresh air and a chance to unwind. As they strolled through the quiet paths, Josh reflected on how far they had come. Rocco no longer pulled away when children ran past, and Josh felt more confident than he had in years. But as they neared the park's entrance, they saw a familiar group, Josh's bullies. His body tensed instinctively, and he felt the old fear creeping back. Rocco sensed his distress and stepped closer to his side, emitting a low growl. The boys noticed them and exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, the leader, tried to act tough. "Still hiding behind your dog, Josh?" This time, something was different. Josh stood taller, his hand steady on Rocco's leash. "I'm not hiding," he said firmly. "And you should know that Rocco doesn't like bullies." Rocco's growl deepened, but Josh kept him calm with a gentle touch. The bullies hesitated, clearly intimidated. They muttered something under their breath before walking away, leaving Josh and Rocco in peace. Josh let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We did it, Rocco," he whispered. "We really did it." The dog wagged his tail and nuzzled Josh's hand, as if to say, "Yes, we did." By the time they returned home, Josh felt a new sense of confidence blooming inside him. He had stood up for himself, not just with words, but with the quiet strength that came from knowing he wasn't alone anymore. Rocco had taught him that fear could be faced and conquered. That evening, as they sat together in the backyard watching the sunset, Josh spoke softly to his friend. "We've both been through a lot, huh? But I think things are going to get better from here. We'll take it one step at a time. Together." Rocco rested his head on Josh's lap, his eyes soft and peaceful. For the first time in a long while, both of them felt something they hadn't thought possible: hope. The days following the confrontation at the park passed peacefully. Josh and Rocco continued building their routine, growing stronger together with each victory. Rocco's fears were less frequent now, though sudden loud noises still startled him. Josh also found himself handling school a little better. The bullies seemed to keep their distance, and a few classmates even approached him with friendly conversation, noticing the change in his demeanor. But healing was rarely a straight path. Both Josh and Rocco still carried shadows from their pasts, and those shadows had a way of creeping back when least expected. One evening, while Josh's family was having dinner, a neighbor came by to ask for help with some yard work. Josh's dad went outside to talk with him, leaving the door slightly ajar. Rocco, curious, wandered out onto the porch. As he sniffed the air, something made him freeze in place: voices, footsteps coming closer. Two men were walking down the street, and one of them was loud and aggressive, shouting angrily into his phone. His tone was harsh, commanding, and it triggered something deep inside Rocco's mind. In an instant, the peaceful dog reverted to the terrified animal he had once been. His body tensed, His ears flattened, and he backed away toward the house, shaking uncontrollably. Josh noticed Rocco's reaction from the dining room window and rushed outside. He knelt beside the trembling dog, gently stroking his fur. "It's okay, Rocco. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." Rocco whimpered softly, his wide eyes darting toward the approaching men. One of them glanced over, frowning. "Is that dog all right?" he asked gruffly. "He's fine," Josh said quickly, keeping his voice steady. "He just gets scared of loud voices." The man shrugged and continued walking. Once they were gone, Rocco's trembling eased, but Josh could still feel the fear in him. He realized then how much his friend was still haunted by his past. That night, Josh spoke with his parents about what had happened. His mother suggested talking to the shelter manager, Linda, for advice on how to help Rocco overcome his trauma. The next day, Josh and Rocco visited the shelter. Linda greeted them warmly and listened as Josh explained the situation. "It's not uncommon for dogs with a history of abuse to have triggers like that," she said. "But the fact that Rocco didn't lash out or run away completely shows that he trusts you. That's a huge step." Josh nodded, relieved but still worried. "How do I help him move past it?" "Patience and exposure therapy," Linda replied. "You gradually introduce him to controlled situations where he might encounter those triggers, but in a safe environment. Over time, he'll learn that those situations aren't dangerous anymore." Josh was willing to try anything if it meant helping Rocco heal. He spent the next few weeks slowly exposing Rocco to new experiences. They visited busier parts of the neighborhood, where people were louder and more active. Josh made sure to reward Rocco with treats and praise whenever he remained calm. Little by little, Rocco's confidence grew. Just when things seemed to be improving, the past found its way back to them in a way neither of them expected. One afternoon, as Josh was walking Rocco near the park, a man approached from the opposite direction. He was tall, with sharp features and a harsh expression. Rocco immediately froze, his body going rigid. Josh could feel the tension through the leash and noticed the way Rocco's ears flattened and his eyes widened in recognition. "Easy, Rocco," Josh whispered, kneeling beside the dog. But Rocco wasn't just afraid, he seemed to recognize the man. Josh's heart sank as he realized this might be someone from Rocco's past. The man stopped a few feet away, frowning. "Hey, that dog looks familiar. Is his name Rocco?" Josh hesitated, instinctively stepping between the man and his dog. "Yeah, his name's Rocco." "Why? I think I know him. Used to belong to a buddy of mine," the man said, his tone casual but unsettling. "Did you adopt him from a shelter?" Josh's mind raced. He didn't want to reveal too much, but the fear in Rocco's eyes told him everything he needed to know. This man had been part of whatever trauma the dog had endured before. "He's with me now," Josh said firmly. "And he's not going anywhere." The man chuckled darkly. "Relax, kid. I don't want him. Just thought it was funny to see him again. He always was a nervous wreck." Josh clenched his jaw, anger flaring inside him. "He's not a wreck. He's brave. Braver than you'll ever be." The man's expression hardened for a moment before he shrugged and walked away. Josh stayed still until the man was out of sight, then turned to Rocco, who was still trembling. "It's okay," Josh whispered, hugging him gently. "He's gone. He's never going to hurt you again." Rocco let out a low whine and leaned into Josh's embrace. For the first time, Josh saw the full extent of his friend's pain. But he also saw the courage it took for Rocco to trust him despite everything. That evening, Josh reflected on what had happened. He realized that both he and Rocco had faced their greatest fears. Josh had stood up to someone who symbolized everything he was afraid of, and Rocco had confronted a ghost from his past. They had survived the encounter together, and that gave Josh a renewed sense of strength. The next day, he told his parents about the man at the park. His father reassured him that they would report the encounter to the shelter and local authorities, just in case. But Josh wasn't as afraid anymore. He knew that he and Rocco could face whatever came their way. Their bond was unbreakable now, a partnership built on trust, love, and shared resilience. For the first time, Both of them felt truly free from the chains of fear. The days following their encounter with the man brought a sense of quiet determination. Josh and Rocco had faced the ghosts of their pasts and emerged stronger. Their bond, now unbreakable, became the foundation for a new chapter in both their lives. At school, Josh noticed a change in himself. He walked with more confidence, no longer keeping his head down or hiding in the shadows. His classmates saw the difference, and while the bullies still gave him the occasional glare, they no longer intimidated him. Josh's new demeanor attracted the attention of people who wanted to befriend him. He wasn't invisible anymore. One afternoon, during lunch, a girl named Emma approached Josh. She was one of the few people who had always been kind to him but had never been in a position to intervene when the bullying happened. "Hey Josh," she said with a smile. "I heard you have a dog now. A German Shepherd, right?" Josh nodded, feeling a little shy. "Yeah, his name's Rocco. He's pretty awesome." "That's really cool. I love dogs," Emma said, her eyes lighting up. "Do you take him to the park? Maybe we could meet up sometime. I'd love to see him." Josh hesitated for a moment but then smiled. "Yeah, we go to the park a lot. You should come by." For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was building genuine connections. He wasn't just the kid who got bullied anymore. He was someone people wanted to know. At home, Rocco also began to thrive in ways Josh hadn't expected. His trust in Josh's parents grew stronger, and he started to interact more comfortably with neighbors during their walks. One day, the family attended a community event at the park, bringing Rocco along. To Josh's surprise, several families and kids gathered around Rocco, curious about the gentle yet protective dog. Rocco, who once flinched at every sudden movement, now stood calmly as children petted him. He even wagged his tail, a small but powerful sign of his healing. "You've done wonders with him," one of the neighbors said to Josh's dad. "A dog like that, he must have gone through a lot. But look at him now. He's part of your family." Josh beamed with pride. Rocco wasn't just a part of their family. He was a symbol of resilience and hope. Despite the progress they had made, there was one more challenge ahead. Josh's school was hosting a field day event, and the thought of being surrounded by large crowds still made him nervous. He hadn't told his parents or Rocco about his fears, but he couldn't shake the anxiety as the day approached. When the morning of the event arrived, Josh felt the familiar tightness in his chest. He stared at himself in the mirror, wondering if he could handle it. Then he looked down at Rocco, who stood beside him, watching with calm, steady eyes. "You always know when I'm scared, don't you?" Josh whispered. I guess I just have to face it, like you did." He knelt down and hugged Rocco, drawing strength from his friend's presence. "Thanks, buddy. I think I can do this." At the field day event, Josh kept his nerves in check by focusing on Rocco's lessons. Stay steady. Stay present. Don't let fear take over. He joined a few classmates in some of the activities, and to his surprise, he started to enjoy himself. Emma found him halfway through the day and invited him to join her group. Together, they played games, laughed, and cheered each other on. For the first time, Josh felt like he truly belonged. Later, during a quiet moment, Emma turned to him. "You seem different lately, happier." Josh smiled softly. "Yeah, I guess I finally found someone who taught me how to be brave." "Rocco?" she guessed. "Yeah," Josh replied. "He's been through so much, but he never gave up. Neither of us did." As the weeks turned into months, Josh and Rocco's lives continued to blossom. They faced challenges with newfound courage, always supporting each other. The fear that had once haunted them became a distant memory, replaced by trust, love, and hope. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Josh and Rocco sat together in their favorite spot in the backyard. The warm breeze rustled the trees, and the world seemed peaceful. Josh leaned back, watching the colors of the sky shift from gold to deep purple. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Josh murmured. Rocco rested his head on Josh's lap, his eyes soft and content. "We made it," Josh whispered, stroking Rocco's fur. Together, the stars began to twinkle overhead, their light reflecting in Rocco's gentle gaze. In that moment, both boy and dog knew they had found something rare and precious. A second chance at life and happiness. They had overcome their fears, faced their pasts, and discovered that true strength came from the bonds they shared. Together, they were unstoppable,